Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, Afromandius, back with another video today. Firstly, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I apologize for the hiatus. Things have just been happening in my life, both, everything has just been happening in all sense of like good ways and whatnot. I've celebrated Juneteenth, so happy happy late Juneteenth to all my black viewers out there, and all my viewers of, black origin, I guess you could say. So happy late Juneteenth. I celebrate that with my family. We all had a great time, and for the most part, it went out pretty well because my father got himself a grill, and he's going to start using it now. So hopefully I get around to helping my old man, practice with the grill and whatnot. But I see great things with that grill in the future and whatnot. So, had a great time with that, and just other than just kind of working and kind of get everything like situated and squared away with school and whatnot, everything has just been kind of going up and down with me trying to find the right schedule and how to like build it off of, right? So with all that being said, I'm back with a new video today. Also, check it out. I got myself a nice little poncho right here. You guys might be wondering, oh, Afro, why did you get this poncho? Where did you get this poncho? Well, I'm not really going to tell you because, it's my personal business and I don't feel like sharing it with you guys. But if you are interested in why I'm wearing it in this video today, is that, today we're going to be focusing on a character or characters. That's right. It's going to be another double feature for you guys today because I kind of felt bad, having to take a couple of weeks where I didn't really post any videos. So I decided to spoil my sweet dear viewers with a double feature today, or I guess triple feature, because, it's going to be focusing on at least 3 characters that are going to be playing a role in the Legend universe. I'm still in the Legend universe right now, but I think I'm at a point to where, at least for the main characters that we're going to be focusing on for the, Rising Renegades, I feel like we're at a certain point to where we can stop using, creating a champions video. So again, this isn't my last creating a champions video, but it is kind of like the last that focuses on all of our like hero characters, I guess you can say. So, hooray, we're, finally going to be getting some Building a Bastard videos, right? And to that I say, who knows, maybe it'll be another minute before I come up with that sort of thing. But with all that being said, I'm actually really excited for today's video because it's going to be focusing on 2 and possibly 3 characters that are kind of unique in their own aspects, right? So I know I've been saying that for basically all my characters, but guess what? All these characters are very special to me in one form or another, regardless of whether their background is or whether like, what their power sets and abilities are. Every single character that I make is very special to me. Even if they are played off as like goofs and gaffs, whatnot, that character is very special to me because I created them and I took time to at least illustrate them and kind of have an idea of what they would look like inside of my head and putting it out on paper. Unfortunately, what I have for these 2 ladies and this little spirit that I'm working on, I don't really have any pictures of them yet. So technically, if you were to go back to my Instagram page and look at my Rising Renegades picture, you would see at least one of them inside the bottom, like in the middle and whatnot. Anywho, I'm getting off topic. So, Afro, why are you wearing the poncho? What is with this Western aesthetic that you're going with here? So, to that I say, because we're going to be focusing on 2 ladies who technically aren't of the Western aestheticness, I guess you could say, but one of them does have like a cowgirl aesthetic, and I'm going to get to that in this video. Anywho, I am going off topic. We're already 3 minutes in. Who are we talking about today? Who are we talking about, Afro? All right, so cut it short, we're going to be talking about the Beauregarde sisters, or the beautiful gaze sisters. Gaze as in like look, not gaze as in, I know it's June, but they're not, they're sisters. Don't ship them. They are sisters. That is not allowed. We do not allow incest on the Afromandius page. Anywho, so the Beauregarde sisters are basically the, I've already kind of talked about these sisters in the past. If you were to go back and check out my my first couple of videos focusing on Blaze, Bonk, and Bolt, I've already mentioned one of these sisters, and one of them is the oldest of the sisters, that being Mother Salem. Mother Salem is the oldest of the Beauregarde sisters, and they are of the Children of the Blackened Ash. And before you even ask me what that means in French, I just kind of had it in my head, but then it just kind of left. So I'm just going to call them the Children of the Blackened Ash. And basically, they are a group of voodoo sisters who participate in voodoo and hoodoo and all sorts of other different types of Louisiana magic and whatnot. So yes, these sisters come from Louisiana, or at least my version of Louisiana, because technically if you watch my other videos, I don't call New York, New York, I call it Neo York. So Louisiana, we'll just call it Louisiana. Yeah, that's the best I can come up with, right? So in Louisiana, basically everything is kind of similar when it comes to the culture and focusing on the zeitgeist of the actual like voodoo mysticism and whatnot. And that's one of the other reasons I guess I would say was kind of difficult making this video, is that I had to do some studying and had to do some like background checks and whatnot. Not to say that I have a perfect grasp of what, hoodoo and voodoo magic is, but, very much these sisters are of that culture. And, with everything else that I have in my like stories, I got aliens, I got monsters. So what the heck? Throw in some voodoo magic in there. Why not? Let's spice some things up with some Louisiana like heart and soul and whatnot. So why not? So basically the Children of the Blackened Ash is a sisterhood. That means it's all women and whatnot, right? So, it basically focuses more or less on just protecting one's of sisterhood and one's sister kin. It's basically a sorority, but with a lot more, magic and, black magic involved and whatnot. So these sisters are very much, like they love each other, they care for one another, but they very much are kind of like how I would say like the Wakandan ideology, since they're very much isolated and don't let any sort of outsiders in. So this kind of, didn't really tease off, Mother Salem, because with her being the oldest, she was kind of inclined into the group a lot more and understood the basics and fundamentals of what this clan has to offer. But her younger sister, Mother Selma, I know I'm very good with names and whatnot, right? So her younger sister, Mother Selma, basically is the younger of the Beauregarde sisters, and very much was a lot more rebellious and a lot more, like outgoing, I guess you could say. She was more of a free spirit. We're going to be talking about spirits in a minute because it's going to play a big role in there. So anywho, with all that being said, basically the fundamentals of what these Children of Ash focus us on is just, protect one's sisters, but only if they're a part of the Children of the Blackened Ash. Mother Selma did not participate in that and believed that it doesn't matter if they're a part of the clan or not. If you're black and you're a woman, you should be protected and whatnot, because, as I've mentioned this before, like when it comes to how the timeline focuses on these characters, if I had to say where the Rising Renegades take place, it's definitely during the modern day. So like, just imagine if it was like around like the 2020s. I'm not going to say exactly what time period because it'll pretty much date it if I do, but with these sisters and whatnot, with them participating and practicing in voodoo magic, they are basically able to give themselves longer lifespans. Now, I will say that I did tell my dad that like Mother Salem is around in her 40s, but that's only her appearance wise. She's very much older than that, and she's probably around, like, if we're talking like 2020, and this is during like the 1940s, oh goodness gracious, she'd be around like maybe 70s or so, like around in that like extra time and whatnot. But she keeps herself young and healthy, and maybe she's born with it, maybe it's Maybelline, you never know. But anywho, so Mother Selma basically believed that it doesn't matter if they're a part of the clan or not. If you are black and if you are a woman, you should try to be at least like a little more giving and at least want to try to protect your other sisters who are out there struggling. So, obviously we're in Louisiana during like the 1960s, 1940s, around the time where racism was just all good. If you were black, you only had to be white skinned to, live and thrive and survive and whatnot. So obviously if you were black and a woman, you were basically at the bottom of the food chain. I'm not trying to laugh because it's just, it's very tragic. I apologize for laughing, but it's just like when it comes to like tragedies and how trying to like put a spin on this sort of thing, it's very much awful, but in the sense I'm trying to ground it in the base of like comedy. And I apologize. I shouldn't laugh at this sort of thing, but it's just awful. Like try to like at least tone it down. Like try not to be as serious. It's just kind of looking at it from the outside. It's just if you were a black man, like yes, you had to face racism, but at least you had some form of respect around your other brothers and whatnot. But if you were a black woman, you got nothing, man. I feel so bad for you ladies. I feel so bad. But anywho, focusing back on Mother Selma, she very much, believed that protecting all of her sisters and whatnot. So she would use her magics to at least like protect like abused housewives or women who are in danger by the white man or other white women and whatnot. So she would use her magic and her abilities to basically become a vigilante and whatnot, right? They gave her the name basically the black they called her, what did I call her, they called her the Black Mist, or I don't know how you would say that in French, but basically in Creole and the transatlantic language accent, I guess you could say, basically they just called her the Black Mist. And the Black Mist basically went around protecting young black women and other, sisters from being harmed by others and whatnot. So, it was basically like a little folk tale that went around in their cities and whatnot. When this got back to the Children of the Blackened Ash, they did not like this at all. So they basically said like, all right, we're going to give you two options. Either A, you're going to stop this, or B, we're going to exile you. So, Mother Selma, being the rebellious soul that she was, she said, screw that. I might as well just do my own thing. But, in a sense of she realized that she can't really do this alone. So she calls upon the spirits of the Loa, or the Loa. The Loa are basically folklore of African, like, basically from African mythology and folklore, which binds both humans and deities into like a spiritual realm. I'm kind of going off like by memory, and I already have a bad memory, so it's just kind of just think of them as like higher powered beings and other spirits that are connected to the human world and whatnot. So in this desperate attempt to try to like make her like own like spirit and protector, she basically not births, but basically she makes her own new Loa. And this Loa is known as Roux, or reddish rust color. Basically, Roux turns out to be this little young spirit that very much is hot-headed, very much is like headstrong, kind of similar to a Mother Selma in a way. So her and Roux basically become this like crime fighting duo, and so it was basically now look out for the Black Mist and her Red Boy, I guess you can say. You remember Red Girl? Now it's Red Boy. So, just keep that in mind, that basically, they become vigilantes, and this really pisses off the Children of the Blackened Ash, and more or less just kind of in a sense, more or less just says, all right, you know what, exile. We don't want you. If you're going to keep on continuing this and disrespect our magic like this, we're just going to have to ask you to leave and whatnot. So, Selma more or less says, all right, fine. I guess I'll leave with my tiny spirit boy and we're out of here. And so obviously this, correlates and, this butts heads with her and her sister, Mother Salem, who, obviously with her being older and a lot more disciplined, said, why would you do this? Why go out and, dress up like it's Halloween every night and, just ruin the secrecy of our family? And Mother Salem says someone's got to do it. We're out here, we're like tied up and holed up inside of this swamp. Instead of using our magics to protect those who can't protect themselves, why do they have to suffer while we can at least thrive in our own communities? So obviously the sisters are butting heads. Typical sibling stuff. If you have brothers or sisters, you guys butt heads all the time, whether it's disagreements or life things happen. It's that's just part of life. But eventually over time, she, not to say that Mother, like, Salem agreed to what she's doing, but she understood to where what her sister's coming from, because she sees the injustices that black women face every day and whatnot. And it's just, she realizes that, she didn't agree with her methods, but she understood where she was coming from. So, over time, as she still becomes a vigilante and whatnot, the Children of the Blackened Ash says, we can't allow this. We cannot allow one of our exiled members to basically disrespect us and use our magics that we taught her to basically fight crime and whatnot and be some sort of superhero. Ew. So basically, not only were the Children of the Blackened Ash planning to kill Selma, but also kill Roux, which was basically a young spirit. And her, Selma introduced Roux to Salem, and she saw that obviously this is a young, mischievous spirit, but at the same time, it was a young spirit. It didn't know any better. He didn't know any better. He was still learning. And compared to all the other, like, Loa, all the elder Loa, I guess you could say, like, it was still learning and still maturing and whatnot. So this basically was kind of like the line that was drawn and the straw that broke the camel's back when it comes to Salem's loyalty to the Children of the Blackened Ash, because one, they were going to obviously kill her sister, and that's a no-go. Like, as much as you disagree with your sister, or you agree with my sister's methods, I'm not going to let you kill my sister, and I will not stand for you killing my sister. So that, and also they were going to plan to kill a child spirit. So, obviously she saw how corrupt the Children of the Blackened Ash were, and basically left. Like, obviously she stopped them and their plans, and with the help of Mother Selma and Roux, basically the clan was basically dispersed at this point. So, we don't know if there are any other Children of the Blackened Ash out there. Maybe they are, maybe there aren't. We don't know. Maybe they'll play into a story later. Wink, wink, and unjudge. That's just an idea that I have. But, at this point, this is kind of where Mother Salem and Mother Selma kind of go their separate ways. So, obviously, the rest of the story. Basically, Mother Salem moves from Louisiana and moves up to New York. And obviously, if you know what happens in New York, she adopts two children, one being a clown and the other being a small red girl. And then later on, she gets a, blue boy. So there's just, Mother Salem has kind of like a reputation of just being a loving mother and whatnot. And at this point, with her moving up to New York, before she got Bonk, Blaze, and Bolt, she tried to set up her own little like orphanage for all the young children, whether regardless of they were being of like black, white, or whatnot. She set up an orphanage for kids in need. And basically, she learned from her sister, not only do people just need help in general, but people who don't necessarily of the same blood need a family. They need someone of comfortability and someone they can rely on, that, if they weren't strong enough to fight, they can, have people who can fight for them. So that's kind of the reason why Mother Salem kind of takes in the clown and the red girl and the blue boy, because she realizes that these children come from not broken homes, but very much they're orphans, so obviously with her having an orphanage, or used to be an orphanage, it kind of got shut down because of sweet dear Admiral Yami. Yay, Yami Omoboros, great job, buddy. Anywho, so this is kind of the reason why she was so willing to accept Bolt into her home, is because obviously he's a boy who's lost. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have parents. He doesn't even have a home. So obviously this kind of ties back into the connection of family, or found family, I guess you can say. And, this works really well because, obviously with Bonk, Bolt, and Blaze, they kind of found family within one another. Obviously with Bonk and Blaze, they found like companionship in one another because they were both orphans who come from worlds that are basically doomed to hell and whatnot. So, it kind of plays well into that part. And so is Bolt, obviously with Bolt and Blaze having more of a confound community with one another. They found love that was, beyond that of friendship. But Bonk also found friendship and kinship with Bolt because they realized they come from, beings of high regard and high respect. Their fathers were both of like well-respected members of their community, so it's kind of like the last line of like the patriarchs of their line and whatnot, right? So that's what Mother Salem was doing. What was Mother Selma doing? Mother Selma basically became a vigilante, not only in Louisiana, but basically expand her like image across the entire globe, or at least in the entirety of what my America is and whatnot, right? So basically, she became a vigilante who traveled through like clouds of blackened horses. Basically, the reason why I'm wearing this like poncho and whatnot is because it plays into her aesthetic. Her aesthetic being more of a cowgirl, and her taking on to the rebellious free spirit that fights crime and takes on injustices and whatnot, right? So I'm still kind of writing out what her story would be and how she connects with Kova and, how she met Kova and whatnot. But basically, that's kind of what she was doing in that time. She, met Kova and they had a relationship. And obviously, I should have also mentioned this as well, is that, Mother Salem had a fling with Rockwell, so obviously, that's another connection that the sisters have, is that they just love them some elemental men. What can I say? They're absolute studs and whatnot, right? So, the elementals and the Beauregarde sisters are kind of, they intertwine and whatnot, right? So, that's kind of what I have for the sisters and whatnot. Again, it's not really going to be a long video because when it comes down to their stories and whatnot, when it focuses on the Rising Renegades, not to say they take a backseat, but they kind of serve their purpose as more or less being mentor figures and helping out during like the fighting and whatnot, right? The war between the Black Parade and the Rising Renegades. Obviously, they're there to participate, and they kind of, rekindle the sisterhood and realize that, while yes, they need to fight injustices, but they also need to realize that they also have families, and if their lives are lost, then there's more grief in the family. So while, you need to fight those outside of your family, you need to fight for them, but you also realize that you still have a family that's back at home waiting for you. So that's kind of what the two sides of the same coin. I understand where you're coming from, and you and I are not so different, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of what I have for those two. So, and when it comes to the sequel story, they have even less of a prominent role. Like, they are still there, but I still have some ideas of what I have for them. I don't know. I kind of feel bad because these characters, at least these two sisters, are very interesting. And I was focused so much on like the first three that I didn't really have time to kind of like catch up with these two. But I feel like with the material that I have so far, their stories are just very much rich and just like palpable when it comes to at least focusing on this sort of thing, right? When it focuses on like, mysticism, it like kind of adds more flavor to it, because when it's all said and done, my stories are very much sci-fi, right? I have, sci-fi aliens, I have sci-fi technology, it comes out like militaristic and whatnot, and futuristic, I guess you can say. So with these two characters, it kind of adds like a little more mysticism, a little more magic in there and whatnot. A different type of fighting style, different type of like cosmology, I guess you can say. So I really like that. Anywho, let's talk about their powers and abilities. Obviously, with them being hoodoo, voodoo magic users, they use magic, right? So they use different types of spells, different types of like amulets, and different types of magical items that help them in out battle and whatnot. But I've also mentioned how they have different types of loas and whatnot, right? So Obviously, with Mother Salem, she developed her Loa much later on. When it comes down to it, there's a certain time period where all mothers, especially with them getting older and whatnot, can't do a lot of things on their own, so they call upon the magic of Loa. And Loa basically are the spirits that are connected to the mothers or the sisters if they're younger and whatnot. So with Mother Selma getting her Loa was a younger, more unexperienced, very much just like a child, I guess you could say. And it very much needed to be worked on. And this is kind of plays against her because, most Loa are very much mature, very strong spirits. But when it comes to Roux, it's not it's not like she has to kind of like work. It's basically like a parent-child relationship where the Loa should be the one making sure that its vessel, or not vessel, but it's like master's okay. It's very much like Selma has to make sure that Roux is okay and what. It's very cute. I like the idea of like very much a child, mischievous, higher being taught by a more mortal kind of being, I guess you could say. So that's Roux, and I'm going to get to them in a minute. But Mother Salem also has a Loa known as Vivi. Vivi very much is kind of, another like not personality, but very much another like spirit that focuses over him, and her powers and abilities are very much more tied between nature and also focuses not only on nature but also other different types of elements and whatnot that focuses. It focuses on like earth and like grass and whatnot. I'm gonna get to their powers and their abilities in just a minute. So let's kind of go back to Roux and Selma. So Roux and Selma, very much their powers are based on like fire and more destruction and whatnot. Smoke, smog, fire, ash, and whatnot. So their powers and abilities are limited only to their imagination and whatnot. So Roux can transform into different types of weaponry, and he can also form his body into different types of weapons and also different types of forms. So not only can Roux take a form of like a sniper rifle, but also dual revolvers and also a horse and whatnot. So that's kind of the powers and abilities that Roux has. Also pyrokinesis because he's fire and whatnot. So that's for Roux and Selma, and for Salem and Vivi, for more nature and whatnot, right? So controls life, can control like trees and whatnot, very much like eco-friendly, I guess you could say. And that also kind of shows the dichotomy between the sisters. One more or less focuses on destruction, while the other one focuses more on life. Not to say that like Roux is evil or anything, but his powers are very much more destructive and like just a lot more dangerous and uncontrollable. While Vivi is a lot more controllable and a lot more like focuses on life, I guess you could say. So that's another dichotomy between the sisters and whatnot, right? So let's kind of go over it. Okay, say it with me now. Not really, like they have good strength, but they're not like throwing cars and stuff like that. Like they're stronger than the average human, to be sure, but they're not like building busters or anything and whatnot, right? So in moderate speed, at least when it comes to Vivi, it's moderate speed, but when it comes to at least Roux, with him transforming into the horse, he is a lot faster, and with fire, obviously catches a lot faster compared to everything else. So this helps out Selma in the long run. Intelligence, I would say, obviously with Vivi being more experienced, being more of an experienced Loa, and also factors with Salem, good lord. This is what happens when characters have similar names. Also factors into there that Salem is a lot smarter compared to her sister, not only through experience, but also battle experience and whatnot. Not to say that, Selma is stupid or anything, but, it's just her battle IQ is a little bit higher compared to her sister's, sure, but regular IQ and whatnot, her sister is better. Salem is better. So obviously with their weapons and whatnot, her sister, as I mentioned before, Roux can transform into different types of like arsenals and whatnot, different types of guns. So while her sister, Mother Selma has the weaponry and whatnot, the firearms. Her sister focuses more on like not range combat, more close quarters combat. So swords, daggers, staffs, and whatnot. That's what Vivi's able to transform into. And that, and also, she doesn't believe in using guns, but she has, Mother Salem has the belief of kicking your ass, but she doesn't have the belief of shooting you. She believes in a fair one-on-one fight, blah blah blah. So that's kind of the powers and abilities of these two characters. But where do they morally stand? Obviously, creating a champion, these characters are morally good. They're not, vicious in any sort of way. And as I mentioned before, like, yes, Mother Selma is very much a vigilante, but she doesn't kill necessarily. Obviously, I know I said that Roux transforms into different types of, like, firearms and whatnot, but she doesn't aim to kill. She very much aims to enact justice, but she doesn't want to kill. Now, she doesn't necessarily have a no-kill rule. If a push comes to shove, she's willing to snuff out a life. But she doesn't really do that in the sense she just more or less incapacitate. Good Lord, that is a hard word to say. Anywho, so that's, obviously with these two sisters, they believe that, they don't kill unless absolutely necessary. And same goes with the Loa. The Loa, obviously following the Master's rule, they don't kill unless absolutely, necessary. Now, it started off at first for Roux that he very much wanted to kill, but obviously following Selma's instructions, he doesn't kill unless absolutely wanted to and inherently needs so. Anywho, what do these characters mean to me? These characters are very special because, as I mentioned a couple minutes back, it adds a different type of flavor and mysticism to my universe and cosmology. As I mentioned before, when it comes down to it, this universe is very much sci-fi. So the aliens and the futuristic, militaristic kind of ordeal very much is forefront and whatnot. So with these two sisters adding a little more mysticism and hoodoo magic and voodoo, it very much adds a different layer to my planet that isn't just all technology and whatnot, right? So, they have a lot of potential to do a lot of great things, and I do imagine them staying for the long run, but obviously with them more or less getting older, they are very much in the role of mentorship and, making sure that the younger generation is ready to fight the evils that they cannot anymore. So, with all that being said, I just came to the realization that I basically gave them stands. If you don't know what stands are, basically they're from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I'm not really going to go into it, but screw it, why not? Let's have stands in there. We got aliens from Dragon Ball. We got what else? We got Naruto. So screw it. Let's add stands in there too. Obviously, it's not one for one stands, but it very much I did take inspiration from the stands from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and without even realizing, I just added into my universe. Great minds think alike, as one would say. But with all that being said, again, it's going to be a bit of a shorter video today. Not only does it focus on, two characters that don't really have a major role in the story, but they very much, basically everything that I have already said, I've said back in my other videos and whatnot. So, again, not to say that I don't like these characters, it's just everything I've already said has been said, and I need to start writing out more stories for these characters, because I do imagine them doing their own thing and their own little spin-offs and whatnot, and there's a lot of flavor I can tap into when it comes to the magic and stuff like that. So, with all that being said, I'm really happy to how, this video came out, and at least getting back into the swing of things when it comes to talking with you guys and getting my stories out there, because, I know people are watching, and I'm, I know it's kind of been a minute since I've done this sort of thing, and I may be a little rusty, but you know what? It doesn't matter, because honestly, as long as I'm talking to you guys, that's all that matters to me. But with all that being said, I have been Afromandius. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolytes, and I'll catch y'all next time.